Chapter 5. Night had fallen, but there was still no sign of Peter and Wendy. The boys weren't worried because they were sure Peter could handle any problem and would come back. It was already past the boys' bedtime. They thought maybe Peter and Wendy had come home by swimming or flying. The boys set off for home. They hoped Wendy and Peter had already returned home. Meanwhile, a heavy silence had settled over the lagoon. A faint cry for help could be heard in the distance. With all his strength, Peter pulled up Wendy, who had fainted. The water had risen higher. Peter knew that both of them would drown very soon, but he couldn't do anything about it. He brought his head close to Wendy's ear and said, "Wendy, the rock is about to go underwater." Wendy whispered, "Let's go home." "Wendy, we either have to swim across or fly over. You could have actually done it all by yourself alone." Wendy became worried. Peter quietly said, "Hook has wounded me. I can't come with you." "But the water has risen. If we don't go, we'll drown." Wendy covered her eyes with her hands so she wouldn't see the water. She felt like these were the last moments of her life. Suddenly, Peter felt something light touch his foot. He looked down at his foot. Michael's kite was under his foot, the kite that Michael had made one day and let go the next. Peter shouted happily, "If this kite could lift Michael off the ground, it's strong enough to carry you too." Wendy shook her head from side to side and said no. Peter said, "We'll go together." "I won't leave you alone." Peter took the kite and tied it around Wendy's waist. Wendy held on to Peter. She didn't want Peter to go anywhere. But Peter quickly pushed Wendy toward the sky. Wendy went higher and higher. The water was rising higher every moment. Peter heard the sad song of the fairies from under the water. A wave of fear swept through him. He stood on the rock, smiled, and stared at the lagoon. Small waves lapped at his feet. The water kept rising, covering more and more of Peter's legs. Suddenly, something moved on the water. He thought maybe it was a piece of the kite that caught his eye. The kite's paper was fighting with the sea. Peter, who always rooted for the underdog, clapped for the paper. Suddenly, the paper turned toward him. He realized that what he had mistaken for a piece of paper was actually a magical bird that had come to save Peter. The magical bird came toward Peter with its nest. Peter shouted, "Why did you bring your bread?" The bird didn't understand Peter's language. It said something in its own language and pointed to its nest. Peter, who didn't know the bird's language either, shouted angrily, "What are you saying?" With great effort, the bird dragged its nest toward the rock. It jumped up itself to show what it meant. Finally, Peter understood what the bird was saying. He took the nest and waved his hand in thanks. The bird pointed worriedly at its eggs. She was afraid that her eggs might break and the chicks would die. Peter put the eggs in his hat and set it afloat on the water. The bird was happy. She felt relieved that the eggs would be safe until the chicks hatched. Peter went into the nest. He secured the stick inside the nest like a pole. He hung his shirt from the stick like a sail. The bird came down as well. She gently sat on her eggs and moved away. At last, Peter reached the shore. He went straight to the underground house. As soon as the children saw Peter, they threw a celebration for him. Wendy was happy that everyone was together again, safe and sound, but she couldn't tolerate breaking the rules. That's why she made the children go to bed. After the fight and the help the Indians gave the boys, the Indians became friends with the children. They were now willing to do anything for the boys. The Indians guarded the underground house all night. During the day, they would wander around nearby. The Indians had given Peter the title of White Father. Peter really enjoyed his new title. The days and nights passed in peace. One night, as usual, the kids had gathered at home. The Native Americans wrapped themselves in blankets and went to their posts. Peter climbed onto a rock to figure out the time. The only way to tell the time on the island was the crocodile. They had to stay by the crocodile until the clock struck. They could tell what time it was by the strikes of the clock. The kids were sitting around the table, noisily eating their food. As usual, Wendy asked the kids to be quiet and not talk to each other. But the kids didn't listen. Each one was saying something and complaining about the other. They complained so much that Wendy got bored. She brought her sewing basket and started mending the children's pants. At that moment, Peter's voice was heard. The boys ran. At the door, the Indians bowed to Peter. Peter entered the house. One of the twins asked Peter to play with them for a while. Peter, out of selfishness, agreed to the request. They all changed into comfortable clothes and started playing. First, they played shadow games, then they started a pillow fight. Before bed, Wendy told them a story. Wendy told the very story that the boys loved and Peter hated. The very story that showed mothers and fathers always love their children and never forget them. Wendy smiled and began her story. Once upon a time, Mr. and Mrs. Kindness lived in a house with red bricks. Their house number was 14. Their names were Mr. and Mrs. Darling. At that very moment, Michael suddenly said,
I think I actually know this lady and this gentleman, I'm pretty sure.
John nodded his head and said,
Go on, narrator.
Wendy smiled and said, Mr. and Mrs. Darling had 3 children. The children's nurse was a kind and loyal woman, although Mr. Darling didn't really like the children's nurse. One night, all 3 children ran away and went to Neverland, where the Lost Boys were. Tootles said,
Wasn't one of the Lost Boys actually named Tootles from the story?
Wendy said, yes, there was. Tootles said,
Hooray! I'm actually in the story now. This is so exciting.
Wendy gave a sad smile and said,
How do you think the parents felt when they saw their children were missing? One of the twins said, I was hopeless. Wendy smiled and said, You have no idea how great a mother's love is. Tootles said excitedly, I really love a mother's love. Wendy smiled and said the runaway children were sure their mother always kept the windows open, hoping for their return. Wanting her story to be very moving, Wendy said, Now let's take a look into the future. Years have passed. A dignified, elderly lady steps off the train at London Station. Who is this lady? Wait, am I seeing this right? This is the lovely Wendy herself. By the way, there are also 2 strong gentlemen with her. These 2 gentlemen are John and Michael. Right from the train station, Wendy points somewhere and says, Look over there, the window is still open. Then all 3 of them fly toward their parents. God, there are no words to describe the joy in that home. Peter quietly said, Wendy, you're reading it wrong. I also thought for years that my mother always kept the window open. That's why, after months away from home, I flew back to her. But not only was the window not open, I hadn't even put up a railing. When I got closer, I saw a little boy sleeping in my bed. My mother had forgotten me. Peter's words scared the children. John and Michael, ignoring what Peter said together, Wendy, let's go back. Wendy hugged her brothers lovingly, and with a gentle smile, she said, All right. The boys were surprised. They asked Wendy to stay with them, but Wendy answered firmly, They can't stay here any longer. She looked at Peter and said, Peter, will you arrange for us to return? Peter said with sadness, If you want, yes. Being separated from Wendy was very hard for Peter. He took a few deep breaths and left the house. When he came back, the boys gathered around him and said, We won't let Wendy go. We'll imprison her. Wendy stared at the boys with a lump in her throat. Peter lowered his head and muttered under his breath, I asked the Indians to guide you through the forest. Tinker Bell will also help you cross the sea. Tinker Bell was happily sitting on her bed. She couldn't believe that Wendy was finally leaving. The boys looked sadly at John and Michael. Seeing the boys' disappointed faces, Wendy said,
If you want, you can come with us too. I'm sure my parents would love to take care of you.
The boys jumped up and down with joy. They begged Peter to let them go with Wendy. Peter gave a bitter smile and quietly said, Go. The boys quickly went to pack their things. Wendy looked at Peter with concern. Peter was sitting in a corner, sadly watching the boys. Wendy sat next to Peter and said,
Peter, you should go pack your things too. I'm not supposed to come with you.
Peter, to show that Wendy leaving didn't matter to him, played the flute. Wendy took the flute from Peter and said,
Come on, let's find your mother together.
Peter didn't miss his mother. He could manage life even without his mother.
He said, No, Wendy, I want to always stay a boy and have fun.
Everyone stared at Peter in astonishment. Peter said,
I hope when you find your mother, you love her.
Peter's words made the boys hesitate. Peter said loudly,
Please go without crying or making any kind of commotion. Goodbye, Wendy.
Wendy, for the last time, told Peter to take care of himself. Peter nodded and told Tinker Bell to go ahead. Tinker Bell darted up the tree like lightning, but no one followed her, because at that very moment, the pirates attacked the Native Americans. The boys looked at Peter in fear. It was as if they wanted him to help them. The pirates' attack was unexpected. Hook and his men had reached the underground house. All they had to do was wait until dawn to enter the house. The great chief of the Native Americans had wrapped himself in a blanket and was calmly crouched above the boys' house. The pirates' sudden attack startled the Native Americans for a moment, but no one moved. It was as if they were prepared and had invited the enemy themselves. Moments later, the Native Americans grabbed their weapons and sounded the war horn. The war horn was a special horn that the Native Americans blew before going into battle. The Native Americans and the pirates clashed fiercely. Hook was shouting the whole time.
I absolutely want all of Peter Pan and the boys alive, please.
There was something about Peter that drove Captain Hook crazy. Peter's pride and courage got on Hook's nerves. Hook reached the top of the underground house, but no matter what he did, he couldn't get through the holes. He pressed his ear to one of the holes to listen. What are Peter and the boys saying? Suddenly he heard Peter say to the boys,
When you hear the sound of drums, it means the Indians have won. Be careful. As soon as we hear the drums, we should go outside.
At that moment, an idea came to Hook's mind. He signaled the pirates to beat the drums. Hearing the sound of the drum, Peter became happy and shouted,
They won! Yes, they won! The Indians won! They really did it!
The children cheered. They had to finish the unfinished business from last night. Everyone said goodbye to Peter and left the underground house. Hook ordered that one person stand by each hole. He also ordered the rest to lie in ambush a little farther away. The first one to come out of the hole was Curly. Curly landed right in the arms of one of the pirates. The pirate threw Curly at Captain Hook's feet. In the blink of an eye, all the children ended up at Captain Hook's feet. The pirates made the boys sit on the ground and tied them together with rope. Hook ordered the children to be taken to the ship. It wasn't easy to move the children with their hands and feet tied up with rope. They could have fallen to the ground like barrels. Hook thought they could use the little house as a means of transportation. They threw the children into the house, and 4 of the pirates hoisted the house onto their shoulders. The pirates sang their special pirate song and set off. As soon as they started moving, a thin stream of smoke, like a jet, came out of the house's chimney. The smoke reminded Hook of someone who wasn't among the children. Hook, who was still waiting to catch Peter Pan, waited until everyone had gone away. Then tiptoeing, he went to the underground house. Quietly, he dug out one of the holes so he could get through it. The holes were very narrow. To get through them, Hook had to dig a narrow passage just big enough for his own body and enter the house. The underground house seemed empty. Hook thought that maybe Peter Pan had fallen asleep at the foot of the tree, dagger in hand. Hook wiped the sweat from his brow and set off to leave. Suddenly, his eyes fell on a large bed where Peter was sleeping. After the children left, Peter had sulked for a while, trying to convince himself that their departure didn't matter to him. He was so tired that he lay down without pulling the bedspread over himself. He was lying on the bed. Most of the time, Peter had sad dreams and would cry in his sleep. At times like these, Wendy would wake him up and sit beside him. Wendy would calm Peter down with her sweet words. As usual, Peter was having bad dreams. His hand had fallen off the bed and he had pulled his legs up to his stomach. Hook gave Peter a wicked smile and approached him. Suddenly he noticed a glass sitting next to Peter's bed. Foolishly, Hook thought the glass contained poison, just like the medicines he always carried in his bag. He poured some of the medicine by the bed into Peter's cup of water and left the underground house. Unaware that the so-called poison was actually pumpkin syrup, Wendy had made the syrup for Peter so he could sleep peacefully at night. At 10 o'clock in the morning, crocodile time, Peter woke up. At that very moment, there was a knock at the door. Peter gripped his dagger tightly and asked, "Huh?"
Who's there?
There was no answer. He thought he was mistaken, but then the sound at the door came again. Peter asked again,
Who's behind the door?
but once again there was only silence behind the door. He went up to the door and shouted.
I won't open the door unless you speak.
Tinker Bell said softly,
Peter, open the door. Peter quickly opened the door. Tinker Bell, with her muddy clothes and eyes sparkling with excitement, entered the house. Excitedly, she told Peter the news of Wendy and the boys being captured. Peter's heart turned upside down. He grabbed his dagger and said,
I'll set all of them free.
Peter strapped a dagger to his waist and set off, knife in hand. The air was cold. A light snow was falling, erasing all the footprints. Peter had learned how to walk and not lose his way in the forest from the tiger. He had also taught the boys how to walk in the forest so they wouldn't get lost. Peter was sure the boys knew how to find their way in the forest. He knew that if Slightly got the chance, he would make a fire so Peter could find him. Curly had learned to drop crumbs behind him so a trail of crumbs would be left on the ground. Wendy would also leave a handkerchief on a branch so Peter could find it. Confident in his friend's cleverness, Peter gripped his dagger tighter and moved forward. The ship was in the bay. Its flag and fearsome name kept the ship safe from any harm. A few of the pirates were leaning against the ship's railings. The rest were busy playing games. The four who had carried the little house on their shoulders were lying on the deck. Lost in thoughtful contemplation, Hook slowly stepped onto the deck of the ship. At that moment, Hook believed that Peter was finally out of his way for good. Even though all the boys were on the ship, there was no sign of joy or victory in Hook's walk. It was as if he wanted something more than just capturing the boys. Hook was always hopeless and depressed. Most of the time he would talk to himself in solitude and reminisce about the past. Hook had studied at one of England's famous schools. At school, he had learned certain manners and etiquette, manners that he still sometimes observed, like wearing neat clothes and reciting poetry. Hook sighed and spoke to the pirates.
Did you chain up the children so they wouldn't escape?
Hook didn't wait for an answer. He ordered the children to be brought up on deck. Everyone except Wendy stood in line on the deck. It was as if Hook didn't see the children. Lost in thought, he was humming to himself and seemed cheerful. Finally, he raised his head and said loudly,
There's room in the cabin for 2 people.
6 of you will have to work on deck.
Which of you will stay on deck?
Wendy had told the children not to make Hook angry. Tootles politely stepped forward and quietly said,
Excuse me, sir. My mother doesn't want me to become a pirate. Slightly, does your mother want you to?
Slightly replied sharply.
No, I don't think so. My mother wants me to be a successful person.
One of the twins said.
My mother doesn't want that either.
Hook got angry, roared, and shouted, Be quiet! He stared into John's eyes and said,
In my opinion, you have more courage and guts. Let's see, do you want to become a pirate?
John sometimes wished he could become a pirate, so he replied hesitantly,
If I just give it a shot and become a pirate and call myself Jack Melonhand.
Hook smiled and said,
What a great name. If you join us, we'll call you just that.
Well, yes, Michael, you know.
He looked at John. He wanted to know his brother's opinion. John was waiting for Michael to decide. Suddenly, John remembered a sentence and said, The pirates of the city of Pendergris are here. Hook growled and said,
The pirate's oath! Death to the citizens!
John's behavior noticeably changed from,
Sorry, I really can't join you, unfortunately.
Michael said confidently.
Me neither.
The pirates lost their temper. Hook roared and said,
I'll hurl you all into the sea so you become food for the sea pigs. Now, bring their mother up on deck right now, quickly.
Hook glanced at the boy, then shouted again,
Are the cannons ready to fire?
The boys turned pale, but they tried not to show their fear to Wendy. Hook smiled at Wendy and said,
Now you'll see how I kill the boys.
Wendy looked at the collar of Hook's fancy clothes. His collar was dirty and filthy. Wendy frowned and, terrified, asked,
Are the boys going to die?
Yes, that's right. They will absolutely die.
Then Hook announced loudly and clearly,
Yes. Do you have anything to say to the boys?
Wendy swallowed her saliva and said firmly,
I have a message from your real mothers. We wish for our sons to lose their lives like heroes.
One by one they loudly declared that they would fulfill their mother's wishes. Hook shouted,
Enough! Take Wendy to the mast! To the deck!
One of the pirates took Wendy toward the mast and quietly whispered in her ear,
If you promise to be my mother too, I'll save you from Hook.
Wendy replied in a scornful tone,
I don't want to have a child like you.
The pirate angrily tied Wendy to the mast. The boys didn't want to see this scene. They hung their heads and trembled with fear. Hook was laughing. He wanted to force Wendy to watch as he threw the boys into the fire. Hook ordered them to light the fire, but at that very moment a terrifying ticking sound was heard. Everyone heard it and looked at Hook in fear. Hook, terrified, dropped to his knees and crawled away from the sound on all fours. The pirates cleared a path for Hook. Hook shouted and said,
Please hide me!
Hook's pirates hid him under the planks. The boys ran to the edge of the ship to see the crocodile coming up, but there was no crocodile. Instead, they saw Peter. Peter signaled them to keep quiet.